Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll call the Public Safety Committee meeting to order for December 8th, 2020. Madam Clerk, the roll call and posting of the agenda, please.
Member Lopez.
Here.
Member Ramirez.
I'm here.
Chair McDonald.
Thank you. I'm here.
Thank you. We have a quorum and the agenda was posted in the kiosk on Wednesday, December 2nd.
And Madam City Clerk, I'm not sure if we're going to have you for another meeting or not. So if you'd lead us in the flag salute, I'd appreciate it, please.
I'd be honored. Thank you. Everyone, please stand. Please place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. And do we have any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Nope, we don't have any requests for any items.
Okay, thank you much. I will take us to item C, consent agenda, approval of the minutes. Have the members had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes, and I'll move to approve, and I'll apologize that my iPad is out of battery, and so you get to see my china cabinet. Sorry.
That's okay. It's actually a fairly nice looking china cabinet.
It is. I wish I could use the dishes, but nobody can come to visit anymore. So.
Oh, I know the feeling. Member Lopez, are you okay with the minutes?
Second, yes.
Okay. Madam Clerk, a roll call, please.
Member Lopez.
Yes.
Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Chair McDonald.
Yes.
The motion to approve carries 3-0.
Thank you. That takes us to item D, informational report on gun violence restraining orders. Assistant Chief, I think that might be you.
Yeah, it is, and I'm going to turn it over to the commander of our Special Operations Division, who knows more about this than I will ever know, and that's Chris Williams. So Chris is going to give that presentation for you.
Thanks, sir. Commander, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and get started, and please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation if you'd like. So today, at the request of the committee, I'm going to be speaking on the Gun Violence Emergency Protective Orders, more commonly known as GVROs. The objectives of the presentation today are to provide the committee with some background information, list the criteria for the issuance of the GVROs, explain the process, and go over the number of cases filed by the City Attorney's Office. And then I will briefly talk about a couple of cases of note, and then finally answer any questions that any of the committee members may have. So the background on the GVROs, for those that aren't familiar with it, we've seen throughout our country, state, family members that have gone through situations with their loved ones where they, for whatever mental health reasons they have become concerned about their risk to harm themselves or others, and haven't really had an avenue to use either through the court system, through law enforcement, to get the family members their helps or to remove any of those dangerous weapons, specifically firearms, from their possession, or prohibit them from purchasing any firearms to harm themselves. As we've discussed before, we haven't had, based on our laws, we've had very strict guidelines and laws that we've had to follow that didn't allow us to seize the person's firearms or get them the medical help that they needed. And in 2014, the legislators created the GVRO law that would allow family members and law enforcement to obtain the emergency court order to require the person to surrender the firearms, magazines, and ammunition before they could be used to harm themselves or someone else. The criteria for the GVRO is it can be requested by any officer, even if a crime has not been committed. That they have to prove that there's an immediate and present danger of causing personal injury to themselves or another person. They have to have custody or control, own, purchase, possess, or have the ability to possess a firearm. And we have to prove to the courts that less restrictive alternatives were ineffective or inadequate or were inappropriate for the circumstances. Just to briefly go into it, there are domestic violence restraining orders, there are prohibited person laws, and so there are other avenues that law enforcement can go through to take the firearms out of the person's hands that are in distress or in need. So if any of those other criteria or laws don't fit, and the criteria that I just went over is met, law enforcement can go out and seek a domestic or a gun violence restraining order. To go over the statistics, these are since 2019. Oh, I'm sorry. The process of getting the GVRO, the officer is to serve the person with a temporary order, and that order lasts up to 21 days. That allows the police department or investigators to work with the city attorney's office to schedule a hearing within those 21 days. The city attorney's office will meet with the investigator that is assigned the case and go over the facts of the case. And once that paperwork is assigned to the courts, assigned a judge, the judge will hear the evidence presented by the city attorney's office and determine if a final GVRO should be issued. And really, we couldn't do it without the city attorney's office. They play a pivotal role in this process. They're the ones that actually are going to the court, taking all of the evidence that is collected by the police department and presenting it to the judge. If the judge grants the permanent GVRO, the order lasts between 1 and 5 years, and it can be renewed if there are continuing facts or evidence that is collected by law enforcement that would demonstrate to the judge the need to renew the GVRO. The GVRO orders, so the judge orders the person to surrender all firearms, magazines, and ammunition to law enforcement. Typically, when law enforcement is called and they are able to seize the majority of the firearms, magazines, and ammunition, this order just is to tie up any loopholes where if the person is in possession of other firearms or in between granting the final GVRO is able to acquire or obtain any further firearms, this order prohibits them and requests or requires them to surrender all other firearms that they have. And it also prevents the purchase of any firearms and ammunition during this order, whether it's 1 to 5 years, depending on what the judge grants. Any violation of the order is a misdemeanor and is punishable by a $1,000 fine or imprisonment for 6 months or both. The cases filed since 2019, Oxnard has the most with 10. I reached out to the other local agencies in the county and was able to get this other data. Simi Valley has filed and has been granted 7 GVROs, Ventura Police Department with 4, and Santa Paula Police Department with 1. I tried to get the information from the Sheriff's Department, but because of them having different contract cities that they have, the unincorporated area, they weren't able to provide me the information by the time this presentation was put together. So if that's something that you're interested in, I can get that for you at a later time. If you can move to the next slide, the couple GVRO cases of note, obviously, as I mentioned before, we've had 10 since 2019, but a couple of note that I thought were interesting that the committee may want to hear. This first incident occurred in August of 2019. a male subject for unknown reasons. We still don't know to this day. Started banging on the front door of a residence. The female, who was by herself in the residence, didn't recognize the person and locked herself in an upstairs closet. The male subject kicked in the front door, and the house did have video surveillance. You could see the person actually pacing around the first floor of the residence while holding what appeared to be something in his waistband. He eventually fled the residence, got into a vehicle, and went to some apartments off of Harbor at the Pasmar Apartments. He was heard banging on several of the apartment doors, and while outside, retrieved a firearm and discharged several rounds from his firearm that he had in his possession. A security guard who was working at the apartments was able to detain him until officers arrived, and the officers placed him under arrest. We located, obviously, the semi-automatic handgun that was in the hallway, along with several spent casings. There were bullet holes in the door to the laundry room that was located on the third floor of the apartment building. We sought a GVRO based on the circumstances of this case, and it was granted by the judge. On the next slide, this other case, April of this year, a male subject was driving his vehicle, pulled it in front of a group of teenagers that were riding their bicycles. He stopped his vehicle, got out, and confronted the juveniles. He started chasing them around and yelling out "white power." The juveniles retreated to the beach area off of Harbor Boulevard, thinking that they would be able to outrun this male subject. He continued to chase them. He exited his vehicle and started to follow them on foot. And when they were at the water's edge, this male subject produced a revolver from his pocket and continued to harass the juveniles, point the guns at them in a threatening manner. When officers were arrived, they took the subject into, or as they're going to take the subject into custody, he threw the revolver into the ocean, and that firearm is still not been able to be recovered. We contacted the sheriff's department's dive team, who came out, and they were unable to locate it, most likely because of the tide. But this was another case that we felt met the criteria for the GVROs, and was able to successfully get it filed. And then that concludes my presentation, and I would be willing to answer any questions that you or the committee may have.
Committee members have any questions?
I do. Thank you, Commander. Do you, these two cases, these people seem deranged. So just taking their gun away and putting them under an order, wondering what happened later with these folks. They need some, I don't know that we have the resources or anybody has the resources to do anything about it, but it seems like they're just not well, and if they can't get a gun, they could get something else. Do you have any, it's beyond what we could do, but I just wonder if you know anything about those two individuals and what the fallout was from them.
The first individual, actually both cases, I believe, are still working their way through the criminal justice system. It could be because criminal charges were filed against them for various felonies. I don't know, as far as their background, what mental health or mental illness they do have in the past. I know from working in law enforcement, they'll have a probation report done once their case is adjudicated. And I know with how the county probation system works, there will be some counseling, I'm sure, that they have to seek out and get those resources. But as far as through the city of Oxnard, there aren't any resources that I know that we could recommend or implement for these two individuals.
Could you distinguish what the difference is with the domestic violence restraining order, gun order, and these are not domestic violence cases, but we do know that domestic violence is very dangerous for the officers, the individual. We had some tragedies in our city in the last few years where people just, lost it.
Yes, yes. So as I mentioned before, when we were going over the criteria, we do have domestic violence restraining orders. That is not under my command, so I don't have the stats as far as how many weapons were seized under the domestic violence restraining order process. I do know that there have been unfortunately, several dozen cases where firearms were seized, but that is a completely separate process. And the intent of the GVROs is when it doesn't fall in any other category. And one example I could think of that received national attention was the Isla Vista incident. And there was the individual that was posting Facebook videos, I believe, or somewhere on social media. The police had been contacted, and he did not meet the criteria for 5150 or the mental health hold. The officers weren't able to get into his residence to see if he had any firearms or to seize any firearms. And so it's cases like that that have sparked the legislatures to pass this law, the GVRO, because now law enforcement, if a family member calls and just hypothetically, if you were to use that same incident, officers would be able to determine and see that he could potentially be, or to my knowledge of the case, he would fit under the GVRO, and we would be able to seize his weapons based on the video, write a search warrant and seize the weapons before he did some of the carnage. Unfortunately, he did some other things, like I think he ran over several people, and this is just firearm specific. So I understand your question as far as what other resources there are to get them the help, because they do seem to have some mental health issues.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I could just add something real quick. So your point is well taken, and Chris and I worked most of our law enforcement career, and obviously Chairman McDonald worked his entire career without this tool at our disposal. So this is a good first step, but you'd be surprised, or perhaps you wouldn't be, that even this tool is met with opposition, because you're basically, I mean, we are infringing on this right that many Americans, believe they have. And so even in egregious circumstances, when we go and we make this case that we're going to take guns out of someone's house, and we're going to take guns away from people, it's still not like universally accepted practice. So it's just we feel it's a tremendous tool, but it is shocking sometimes that it's not looked at as like every organization, from the ACLU to the NRA to Coalition to End Domestic Violence to NAMI, should be fully supportive of things like this.
Thank you very much. And I do know that I really appreciate our police department. It seems like every day we get a report that someone's been stopped with guns who has no right to have them. So it's really appreciated, but there's just scary.
Yeah, that's Chris's folks are making a vast majority of those arrests, and it is pretty frightening how many people are illegally carrying concealed handguns out there.
Thank you.
Member Lopez, any comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you. This is just really helpful information, and I think that was kind of the purpose of bringing this forward is perhaps some people out there don't know about this, and the fact that there are ways, right, that this is one tool, one way to protect our families, ourselves, our community. So I really appreciate the information. I just had two questions, if you can clarify, Commander Williams. In terms of the firearms that are removed, is it just based on what might be registered under that individual, or is it any firearms within the household, or how far does it extend?
So once the order is granted by the judge, it gives us more leeway if we believe, based on our investigation, that the person may have additional firearms in their residence that they're not being forthcoming with or registered with them. We're then have the authority to write a search warrant to search the residence. We may or may not take all the firearms. It's based on a case-by-case basis. If it is a person that rents a room from the homeowner and the homeowner has a safe that the person does not have the combination to, does not have access to those firearms, consulting with the city attorney, we may not be able to seize those firearms because the homeowner, if they're able to prove that the person doesn't have access, we can't infringe on their rights. And it's kind of what Chief Sonsegar was talking about. It's kind of a dicey area with the Second Amendment. So we always have an open line of communication with our city attorney's office, and they do a wonderful job of providing us the legal guidance to navigate through the kind of uncertain waters of the GVRO and the seizure of the weapons.
Thank you. And then the other question that I have is during the time that the GVRO is in effect, they don't have access, they're not able to purchase or acquire any firearms. But does this in any way does it remain on the person's background check if, once the GVRO expires or it ends, for them to, make any purchases in the future?
If the person has a GVRO and the GVRO expires and law enforcement or no other entity tries to renew the GVRO, and obviously if they're not prohibited for being a convicted felon or any of the other legal ramifications, then they would be able to purchase a firearm in the future.
Okay. Thank you. And I too, following in the comments from Mayor Pro Tem Ramirez, I certainly understand the conflict that this is one tool, right? But if there isn't any support beyond this, right, even if it's a GVRO that is in effect, 1 to 5 years, if there is no resources during that time, then, what happens afterwards? So I certainly, see that challenge there, but really appreciate this information. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commander, I think you answered the one question I had, which is, does the GVRO give us searchability to go to someone's place if we have credible information they have an additional firearm? And it sounds like that answer is no, absent a search warrant. Would that be correct?
That is correct. It does. And I don't want to get like too far into the weeds with like writing search warrants and stuff, but even though it is a misdemeanor, in the law, it allows us to actually go out and seek a search warrant if the facts and circumstances support it, even though it is a misdemeanor offense.
A lot of people think search warrants are only related to felony offenses, and that's not a correct statement. It's kind of buried in the penal code, and I've had many discussions with many people pointing that out to them, including some DAs. But it is possible. But a search warrant is not necessarily an easy process, depending on the time of day or night you're doing it, and it may be a prolonged response to get one. And this kind of runs hand in hand with, every so often you'll hear calls from people saying we need to outlaw all guns in the community. And my response to that is, that is a great idea. But when you look at the number of arrests that we as a city, the police department makes, generally these people are prohibited persons, convicted felons, drug addicts, or so on, who are automatically prohibited from possessing a firearm, and yet they still do. And kind of goes back to my viewpoint of, we can pass a lot of laws, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but typically the laws affect the people who are law abiding and say, oh, okay, I can't do this, I won't do it. But they don't affect the people who don't necessarily follow the law and say, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. And those seem to be the people we keep running into and utilizing resources on, because the letter of the law or the word of the law doesn't really make a big difference to them. So there has to be another way of getting their attention. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but simply passing a law is it needs something else. And the second thing is that, unfortunately, I don't believe our police department has all the resources it needs in terms of labor power to follow up on all this stuff. It would be nice to be able to follow up on every GVRO and, every 6 months, hey, do you got any new firearms, or do a checkup? And I just don't believe that the resources are there to do that now. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, or if you just want to let it lie.
Well, I will. It's not specific to GVROs, but Assemblywoman Jackie Irwin was able to give us through the grant to deal with prohibited persons, and it's kind of like lumped in with the GVRO. So prohibited persons with firearms. It was shouldered on DOJ, and just because of they have even fewer resources than we do, they just weren't able to facilitate all the checks with the prohibited persons with firearms. So Assemblywoman Irwin was able to get us some grant money so we can do the investigative checks for the prohibited persons. And we're able to go out and do the checks to make sure that they're in compliance or haven't been able to purchase any firearms. So just as a side note.
Okay. And do we do that on a regular time basis or on an overtime basis, or?
It is on overtime. It's through the grant. Through crime analysis, they do a lot of the background checks to see. It's funny, the system's so old and outdated that there's people that are on there that have been deceased for several years or have moved out of the country or out of the state or out of our jurisdiction. So a lot of it's the cleanup, and then we do send out resources and investigate whether or not these people are in possession of any firearms.
And I appreciate that. I'll put on my administrative hat for a few minutes, that because that's an overtime basis, that's one more source of overtime we have to explain to the people. It's not coming out of general fund or not out there to make law enforcement officers rich, is because we don't have the staffing to do this on a regular basis. So we have to rely on overtime to do it. And although people think we're doing this on purpose to fill people's pockets, that's not the case.
Right.
And also having an experience with the California Firearms Reporting System, they call it CFARS. I went down to buy a box of target ammunition a while back. And although I was in law enforcement for 30 years, I have access to the Pentagon, the White House, secure military facilities. I didn't pass the security clearance to buy a box of ammunition. And it took 30 days to sort it out in the system because one system was not communicating with the other system. So I have some faith in our computer systems, but I think there's a lot of ways to grow to make it better. So that's just an anecdotal comment, but I thank you for your efforts, the police department, all the hard work you're doing. Committee members, any other questions? Well, hearing none, we will release you. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time. Chief, thank you for your time also.
Of course, anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That will take us to item number 2, Fire Academy. And I'm presuming Chief Hamilton will be doing this.
Yes, thank you, Chair McDonald. That is correct. This is actually just while the City Clerk bringing up the presentation. This is a presentation that we gave earlier today to the Finance and Governance Committee, but obviously this would fall under the purview of the Public Safety Committee. So City Manager thought it appropriate for me to provide an update to this group as well. Next slide, please. So basically, this is just going over the need to run another academy and sort of a little bit of the background of where we've been since the pandemic hit and since we had to shut down our last academy. Next slide, please. So in March of this year, we did start an academy with 14 recruits. And the academy started on March the 9th. As I'm sure you can all recall, that was right around the time that the pandemic really started to rear its ugly head here in Ventura County. And so the academy actually lasted for 2 pay periods, or 4 weeks in total. The first 2 weeks were in-person training, and then we did another 2 weeks of remote learning, trying to keep things going while we're figuring out whether or not we could continue to host the academy. Ultimately, back in March, we didn't have the same knowledge that we do today about COVID-19. We certainly didn't have anywhere near the testing capacity that we do now. And then obviously we didn't at the time know how deep the city's budget issues were going to become because of the pandemic. So ultimately, we started that recruit academy with 14 recruits. We terminated one individual, one individual resigned, and we terminated 3 individuals, and ultimately furloughed the 10 other recruits until we could figure this out. And just as a little aside, as you can see there, we were allocated nearly $712,000 for that academy. Of that amount of money, $406,000 was returned as unappropriated in October of this year, and it was returned back to Measure O funds. Next slide, please. And so in the 4 weeks we did have that academy stood up, we did expend just over $305,000, and you can see a breakdown of those costs. The hiring costs are a lot to do with the medicals, the background investigations, and those kind of things. Of that $305,000 that we expended initially, approximately $166,000 of that are costs that will not be able to be recovered. And that's, again, the recruitment costs, so the backgrounds, the medicals, that kind of thing. There was approximately $32,000 in personal protective equipment and uniforms, that some of which we'll be able to reuse, some of which will not. And then finally, the biggest expense that we can't recover was the cost of the training cadre. This is associated with having them dedicated to the academy, and that was added up to just over $92,000. Next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say, and we can all agree, that this year has been a particularly hellacious year for everybody. And so before I talk about sort of the toll on the fire department as a whole, I really want to acknowledge that I feel very fortunate that we've been able to keep our workforce as healthy as we have this year. Our personnel are going on COVID positive patients on a daily basis. And we've done, I think we've done a pretty good job so far of keeping our workforce safe. And the other thing I'll say is that all of our firefighters feel incredibly fortunate to be gainfully employed at the moment, when so many others have lost jobs or are furloughed or everything else. But with that being said, we desperately needed this academy in March of this year, and so furloughing it has been tough. It's been tough on our personnel, particularly. It was a tough wildland season, and it still is to some extent. But our personnel have been busy not only here in the city of Oxnard, but also around the state. And we have had personnel work as many as 25 days in a month. And it's worth keeping in mind that when I say 25 days in a month, that's 24-hour shifts where they don't go home. And at the moment, just because we're trying to be so careful with COVID and trying to keep COVID-19 out of our fire stations, that family members have not been able to visit the personnel while they've been stuck at work for days on end. And so I think the single biggest indicator in this slide of how tough it's been on the personnel has been the overtime mandates, meaning that personnel did not want to work and they were forced to stay at work. And the number of mandates have tripled this year, or the number of hours of mandates has tripled this year. So I think that speaks to sort of the workload that we've taken on as an organization. Next slide, please. And so a little bit more on the finance. Before I talk too much about this slide, I just wanted to provide a brief reminder to anyone that may be listening that firefighting is based on a constant staffing model, meaning that we always have 3 people on an engine and 4 people on a ladder truck as a minimum. And even with that being said, the National Fire Protection Association and the Standards of Cover study that we had published in 2017 both recommended that we start making a plan to build towards 4-person engine companies. And so we hopefully we'll get back to that. But because of that constant staffing model, there is always a cost associated with backfilling positions that are vacant, and either they're vacant due to retirements or resignations, but it can be more than that. Just when people take vacations, they get injured on the job, they have jury duty. All of those things mean that we need to backfill those positions, and that's the station coverage costs. And so for the current vacancies that we have, there's an annual station coverage cost or overtime cost of just over $2.3 million. So filling these positions and hiring back some full-time employees to fill these vacancies, their salaries would cost just over $1.4 million. So you can see there, it's an anticipated savings of about $900,000 a year by having full-time employees in those positions as opposed to vacancies. And I know that overtime costs in the fire department in particular have been a hot topic. And so it's worth noting that this year, our overtime, we will go over budget on overtime. However, with the savings from our direct labor costs, meaning a savings from the vacancies that we have, combined with the reimbursements that we will get from wildland or mutual aid deployments, we are hoping that we will be close to on budget. I think we're going to be a little bit over, but not like we've seen in years past. So we are watching that very closely. Next slide, please. So one of the things we did look at, and we're always trying to do coordinate as much as possible with our operational area partners, and certainly this slide just sort of gives you a basic breakdown of the per recruit costs comparing Oxnard Fire Department with Ventura County Fire Protection District. And it's worth noting this is in no way a dig at Ventura County Fire Department. Their academy is 6 weeks longer than ours, which is a large part why their costs are significantly higher per recruit. But I just did want to touch on this because we did look at how we could coordinate more with the county. This is actually one of the rare times we're actually starting an academy at a very similar time. We're both starting academies in January. But as the slide reflects, cost is sort of the biggest prohibiting factor in terms of more coordination. But the other issues to keep in mind is the number of recruits. We have a fairly large academy with 15 recruits. I believe Ventura County is starting an academy with 25 recruits. And so being able to provide a safe environment for that many recruits on the drill ground can be challenging. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is that coordinating schedules is a little bit problematic. We, due to the different risk profiles that each of our communities have, obviously the County Fire Protection District protects a lot more varied of a community. They've got much more rural areas, much more wildland to deal with. And so our academies are slightly different, and that reflects that risk. So an example is that we spend 2 weeks on ladder truck operations and all the special disciplines that go into working on a ladder truck, whereas the county spends, I think, between 3 and 4 days on ladder truck operations. They have type 3 engines, which are the 4-wheel drive engines. They're a little bit more compact, higher off the ground. They're designed to go more into the wildland environment. We don't have any of those types of vehicles, so obviously we don't train on those like the county does. So that there's just some differences in the way our curriculums work within these recruit academies. We are working though on trying to coordinate with them as much as possible on where we do have similarities. So we all teach our recruits some rope rescue system certifications. Those classes: Rescue Systems 1, Rescue Systems 2, Confined Space Awareness. There's some urban search and rescue classes that we both teach our academy groups, and certainly we're going to do our best to coordinate our schedules along with those classes. The other thing that we're doing is we have a dynamic staffing plan for this academy, so that if If we do happen to lose recruits, I certainly hope we do not, but if we do lose recruits through this academy, we'll reduce the number of training cadre that's assigned to the academy. So we make sure we have a safe number of training cadre to help train these recruits, but if we have less recruits, we obviously don't need as many training cadre. And then the other thing we're doing, the second half of our training academy is more of the specialty disciplines. And so again, we'll just bring in certain personnel to teach those specialty disciplines and not have a full-time cadre for the entire 16 weeks. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that that we have coming at us, we as I mentioned, we sincerely hope that all 15 of the recruits that we have starting this academy successfully complete it, because we do have 15 vacancies. And actually, I think that's an important thing to note, is that we furloughed 10 recruits back in March. 2 of those recruits have since resigned to go and work other places. So we have 8 furloughed employees that we're bringing back, and we're adding an additional 7 new employees to this academy. I don't think that was well represented in these slides, but we're also, even if we get all 15 of these through successfully through academy, we will still have vacancies. Well, we will anticipate vacancies in the coming year, again, through retirement. We are looking to add staff through development, specifically adding a fourth firefighter to an engine due to the Sakioka development. And so that will mean we will have additional positions that we need to hire for. So we will need to be going back out and doing some recruiting work in the 2021 calendar year. And we'll be looking to start a new academy at the beginning of 2022. And so just for your awareness, the last academy we did in Oxnard was graduated in 2017. Since that time, we've had 5 employees that have resigned to go to other agencies. Obviously, additionally, we had those 2 furloughed recruits resign to go to other agencies. But in that time, we've also had 7 retirements and 2 terminations. So that's where we've sort of had these had these vacancies build up over time. And so we are looking forward to getting a new recruitment process going. Once this next academy is set up and it's running, we are going to be looking to spend some time and really invest some time in working to recruit more of the local talent we have here in Oxnard and in Ventura County. Next slide, please. And so the request that we made of the Finance and Governance Committee, which was passed and moved forward to the full council, was a request for a budget appropriation of $755,461 from the Measure O Fund 104 to be able to provide this academy that's tentatively scheduled to start on January 11th of next year. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Committee members have any questions or comments for the chief?
Of course I do. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chief. Can I ask you, when you say furloughed, does that mean, what does that mean?
That's a good question. Well, it basically it means that if we do bring positions back, they have the first right of refusal for those jobs. But I don't believe we're providing them any benefit past that. With that being said, we did 3 of the 8 remaining furloughed recruits actually did come back to work for us under grant funding as disaster service workers. And they've been instrumental in helping us with the antibody testing and some other things we've been doing in response to the COVID pandemic.
But they're not actually firefighting.
Correct. No. They're in white shirts that identify them as fire department employees, but they've been primarily doing. We've been utilizing their skills as EMTs and paramedics to do, like I said, sort of antibody testing now increasingly they're actually doing COVID testing for us now that we have some rapid COVID tests that we can provide. So they've been doing that kind of work for us.
And when, it's always a concern when people are leaving for, unless it's just a normal retirement. Could you say something more about that? People moved on to other agencies. Can you say something about that? What you share?
Absolutely. I think, in years past there may have been sort of morale issues that may have, that people have gone to other agencies. I think more recently, really it's a reflection of, it's just a more mobile workforce. I know when I was hired, and I don't feel like I've been a firefighter for that long, but it was kind of, you got hired with a department and that's where you stayed for 30 years. And I never really thought about it outside of that. Whereas I think this generation is a little bit more mobile and more willing to look sort of over the fence and see what else is available. So I think that's part of it. And that's also one of the reasons why we are going to be really working hard to recruit more local Ventura County talent and certainly Oxnard residents as talent, because I don't believe those people would leave. I think that, we invest a lot of money in training these personnel and we do our best to make sure they feel valued, but there are people that, they find jobs elsewhere. And, the last person that left us, he was on the list to be promoted to engineer. He's done some phenomenal work for us. He did a lot of work in occupant safety grants and bike helmet for kids initiatives and that kind of thing. But his wife is a nurse out in Santa Clarita, which is covered by LA County Fire Department. He had an opportunity to move over to LA County Fire Department. He decided to take that opportunity. So things like that do come up.
Thank you for that, because I was going to ask about local hire. But at this point, I'd like to see if our city manager would comment on this request.
I fully support it, as well as the one for the following year.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. All right, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Member Lopez, any comments or question?
No, I'm good. I support this. This is the second presentation. Thank you, Chief.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Chief, just a couple comments. One, I don't think people understand the 2 in, 2 out rule from OSHA. And I know that's probably the basis for the recommendation of going back to 4 firefighters on an engine. And essentially what OSHA is requiring is that for every 2 that go inside a residence, 2 have to be on the outside for safety and operations. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And my biggest fear is knowing the caliber of your firefighters, and that if a 3-person crew shows up, probably theoretically all they can do is throw water on it. But if they hear an extreme need, like someone screaming inside a burning building, they're probably going to violate the OSHA rule and go in and do what they need to do. And I appreciate them for doing that, but I also fear that, they might get in hot water later with OSHA or whoever for doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing, if that makes any sense. So I would love to see us go back to a 4-person engine crew. Otherwise, we have a first piece of equipment that, other than throwing water on it, by written order, can't do a whole heck of a lot. But I know they'll do the right thing when the time comes. So I appreciate that. Secondly, as I would love to see us get to a point where we can anticipate out the number of retirements we might have in the oncoming year and overfill a little bit, so that when these retirements occur, we can have a person ready to step into that position, recognizing that the hiring process, I don't know about for fire department, for PD, from the time we announce it till the time we get an operational cop on the street, can be anywhere from 18 to 24 months. And I would suspect that fire is probably fairly close to that by the time you get, and regardless of whether you send them to the county fire academy or our fire academy, there are all kinds of costs up front of physical background, and all that stuff that we have to go through regardless of which academy we send them to. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, is that the county fire academy, while it's an excellent institution, teaches a different style of firefighter than we do. in some areas that we wouldn't need, and in some areas they may not address the type of firefighting skills that we do need because of being a city. So I think there's a lot of things to take a look at here. And everybody says, well, they're fortunate to have a job, and I said, well, we're fortunate to have them as employees. So yeah, a job is nice, but having quality employees is in there, and I know your department strives to have the best of the best. So and I think that was all of my comments. I certainly support this. Like I said, I'd like to see us go to an overfill position, and maybe the city manager will give me some ear time someday to bend his ear about that. We'll see what happens.
Well, let me chime in really quickly. That word overfill is not my favorite word when it comes to the budget, but the intent though is understood. So we're on the same wavelength. I've just asked last week for HR to give me the attrition forecast for the entire city so that we can have a sense of key retirement waves throughout our department. So I actually have a copy of that. But you're right in general in terms of we have to plan ahead, at least 5 years ahead, so that we don't get behind the 8 ball and then end up being suffocated by overtime. So we're on that path.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the comments. Chief, any follow-up comments on my comments, or we good?
Yeah, if I could, Chair McDonald, just to touch on what you talked about with OSHA, I want to reassure you that all of our personnel are well aware that if they arrive on scene as a 3-person engine company and for any reason they suspect there may be a rescue issue involved, they're not going to stop to consider OSHA regulations. They will very much go in and do everything they possibly can to save a life. And so we have a saying in the fire service that we risk a lot to save a lot, that would be one of those cases. In a rescue situation, OSHA does give us some latitude for that, but we do take their initiative and the 2 in 2 out rule very seriously. And so once we have enough personnel on scene, we will actually assign an entire engine company to that position of being the people on the outside to do any form of rescue. Because ultimately, rescuing a downed firefighter will often take 6 or 8 personnel to remove them from a building. So that's where as soon as we do have enough personnel on scene, we'll assign an entire engine company so that they've got a captain as supervision to be ready to get in there and provide assistance if anyone does get into distress. So, but the 4-person engine companies, there's many a study that show how it improves efficiency and safety for all concerned. And so your comments are well received.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And there's no doubt in my mind they would do the right thing regardless of what any regulatory agency says. I just hate to see them expose themselves to unnecessary risk or having to do a logistical dance with a oversight agency later on down the road, questioning why they did what they did. It is so much easier if we just go to a 4-person crew. We don't have to worry about any of that stuff. We're there automatically. So thank you for that response. Committee members have any other comments?
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second. A roll call, please.
Chair, committee members, there's actually no recommendation on this one. It's
okay. Never mind.
All right.
I missed it on this one. It was receive and file. I got it on the last one, but oh well.
You know where we're at on it.
That's right, Chief. We still like you.
Thank you.
Even though we're not recommending anything.
Thank you.
Okay, that will take us to item E, items for future agendas. Committee members have anything?
Only that I will be always watching out for my favorite city. I won't be participating officially in any of this, but always my first concern is our city's health, the people's health. Thank you.
Thank you. And always feel free to come back as a guest speaker or guest visitor or whatever. We will
Thank you.
Have open doors for you. Member Lopez, anything else?
No, nothing else. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. We'll miss you here.
Thank you. No, I won't be a stranger though.
No, we know. We know where to find.
I live here.
Excellent. Okay, with that, we will move to item F, adjournment. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all and be
Bye,
safe over
everybody.
the holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.